competition to the registry space, to VeriSign and the other incumbents. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing for consumers and consumer choice. And competition is obviously something that we, as being in Washington, we're all very familiar with and supportive of. So Donuts is a new company that we formed. There's 4 of us that founded the company. We all came from different parts of the industry, both 2 from the registrar space, 2 from the registry space. We've had probably a collective 50 years in the industry, just the 4 of us. We've now grown to about 20 folks. We applied for 307 TLDs, which was the most, and I guess Google, as Taylor mentioned, applied for 101, Amazon 78, and so on. So there are a number of companies that applied for multiple TLDs. And when we thought about the new TLD program and we thought about engaging in competition in the registry space, we thought about different models. One model was comparing .com as a large downtown department store. We could try to build another downtown department store a few blocks away and try to compete that way. And we looked at that and decided not to go in that direction. What we decided to do is build a shopping mall where we'll have some anchor tenants and then a whole lot of boutiques. And the boutiques on their own may not be as successful as on a commercial side than they are together as part of a shopping environment and as a mall. So Plumbing, for example, is not going to be the next .com. Bert, I'm sure you're not worried about Plumbing. But for the plumbers, we think that's a good niche TLD that will be very exciting for them and very specific and give good content and explain to the market where they're coming from. So we think that's a more meaningful TLD and a better TLD for them than a .com. So we applied for, again, 307 of them. We've signed in excess of 100 contracts already with ICANN. We've announced the delegation in excess of 30, and we've rolled out 25 of them as of tomorrow. We'll have 4 more coming out tomorrow. So we're doing weekly rollouts of TLDs, and so you'll see, as you know, the first 60 days is a sunrise opportunity where trademark holders get the first crack at the name. So Sarah and others could get their names if they so choose to register them. And after that, it'll become available to the general public. So our first ones are available at the end of January. So one thing we also did was we want to have, on top of the ICANN requirements for trademark protection, which are much greater than the existing TLDs and the incumbent TLDs. So you have mandatory sunrise now, you have this new takedown service called the URS, you have the existing UDRP, you have a dispute resolution process if the registry itself engages in any problematic behavior on the trademark side. We added a lot of protections on our own. Going for so many, we knew that the intellectual property community would have some concerns, so we went even farther and to make sure that our TLDs will be as safe and secure as possible. The biggest one that is probably getting the most notoriety is something we call the DPML, or Donuts or Domains Protected Marks List, where we will have a blocking mechanism where if a trademark holder wants to register its name, they can do that in Sunrise. If they want to block their names across all of our TLDs, they could do that at any time. There are some terms and conditions that apply. And then if they just want to watch and wait and see what happens, they have the ability to use the UDRP and the URS and watching services, claim service, and others. So there's each brand holder, as FairWinds is advising its clients, and I'm sure the folks on the panel are looking at this and saying, what's right for our brands? What's our risk tolerance? What's our risk mitigation strategy? How much do we want to spend on this stuff? But there are opportunities for that, and we're all working together as a community to address those issues. On the name collision side, ICANN has come up with what we believe is a very conservative process where they're letting certain TLDs out. Some are being held, as Bert mentioned. They're being much more aggressive with the new TLD program than any other TLD launch that has happened before. The most recent CC-TLDs that have launched have had no mitigation strategies or anything that just been launched. And And then the TLDs gTLDs that were launched before this, again, no issues with name collision. So, we're confident that with ICANN's conservative approach and having VeriSign and others raise the issue, that the community has gotten together and come up with a very, again, conservative approach, but something that is important and something that ICANN has taken seriously. So we think that's on a conservative but fair path forward. I'm open and available for questions, as I guess the other folks on the panel are, and I don't want to hold anyone up any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to lead off with some questions. Ouch. Sorry about that. And I'd like to start.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Voice collision.
First of all, thank you all for some very informative comments. Very much appreciated, and thank you for the announcement about the award that VeriSign has. On the issue of name collision, I'd like to follow up a little bit on what John just said and direct it to Sarah and Bert, but also that anyone, please feel free to weigh in. And it seems to me that there's been a little bit of a criticism that ICANN got to this late, but that since the inter-aisle study has been done, it's, if I'm not mistaken, .home and .corp have been taken off the table. There's now a technical advisory that ICANN has issued giving advice to technicians how to manage the problem. It's being watched extremely closely by ICANN, it seems. And there have been, if I'm not mistaken, name collisions in the past. And so I guess my question is, what's the practical impact of the name collision issue to a typical internet user like myself, who's not technically gifted and not into the esoteric of the technical nature of it? If you could just elaborate a little bit, maybe illustrate what CBA is. Was there any tremendous problem that the bank incurred or anything like that? That would be my first question.
Thanks. So starting with the CBA illustration, well, no problem occurred because no new names had actually been delegated. This is all in the hypothetical analysis before delegation to see what might happen. But multiply that by 1,400. That's where the scale becomes unnerving. In the previous cases, one of the most famous illustrations was when Czechoslovakia was a country, and .cs was used for computer science departments as well as for the country, and there were some collisions that occurred in an earlier day in the internet, and they could be observed and changes could be made. So many systems have been embedded for so long that it would be hard to say what the consequences could be, and then managing them at a large scale where it's not just a single period in time, one change to respond to, it's multiplied further. Now, having said that, ICANN has been following the issue closely. It has a Security and Stability Advisory Council that has made repeated recommendations over a number of years that these issues could be a concern. And it takes time to adopt recommendations and to adapt and make changes and proposals and so on. Interesting to note, though, the most recent actions from ICANN, and this is to respond to the conservative side of things, actually run the risk of preventing some of the good names that might not cause any harm from actually being used. So to go more specifically into the conservative countermeasure that ICANN allows applicants to take. Remember the chart I showed you with the increasing number of observed second-level domains over a period of time? That's taken from the so-called Day in the Life, or DIDDLE study, conducted by one of the DNS research groups independent of this whole program over the past 8 years. Actually, the independence is important to show that there would be no bias built into the prior year samples. It's just saying, what happens in an ordinary day in the life of the internet from all the root server operators? What kind of queries do they see? So the conservative countermeasure was to say, if any of these second-level domains in your applied-for top-level domain were seen over a previous 8-year period, whether they would cause harm or not, because we don't know what the harm is, just that they were seen from somewhere in some system, then you can't use them until there's definitive proof that there is no harm. Now that is conservative, but it's also limiting, because some of the most popular names that applicants would like fall into that set. That's why VeriSign has recommended, I think ICANN is acknowledging this in its recent guidance to IT operators, that you take a qualitative approach, where you actually look at evidence for harm based on the systems and the way that they use the names. Now, finally, to your question, David, what would be the impact to me as an ordinary user? If I'm generally browsing the internet from my home, I'm not dealing with a corporate network, am I? Whatever I put in for my queries, it will just give me the responses I'm looking for. And if there are non-existent responses, usually someone's search engine gets in the middle and tells me what they think I really should be looking for. If I'm in a corporate environment, though, the situation is different, because I may have applications that I use that built in assumptions that certain names were reserved internal to the network. And we just don't know how many of those there are and what the impact would be. That's the reason for doing more research. That's the reason for ICANN observing that there may not have been problems in the past, has published a 20-page handbook guide to system operators for what they need to do to address the problem.
And I would just add that there may have been some rollouts in the past, but never at this volume and at this number. And I think the problem will be, although it's wonderful that there's now an alert to users, you wouldn't believe the number of companies that we've approached, large companies, to talk about this issue. They don't even know about the issue. Mm-hmm. Many companies don't, and small and medium businesses, office buildings, whoever, they don't even know that ICANN exists. So the educational curve is going to be very large. And I think it was very obvious that .home and .corp had huge volumes of problems. Those should be put aside, which is a very conservative and accurate decision. But we would note that even if a collision occurs in a few times in one of the new gTLDs, and unless you know the consequences from the collision, there could be severe failures. The first time the company sees it, they may not know why something is failing. They may call their ISP, we won't know, so it's very complex.
Thanks. And we certainly support ICANN's endeavors to study the issue as they're doing. They have a contractor that is looking at every individual new TLD application on an application by application basis. As Bert mentioned, 25 TLDs, they're waiting for this report before they release. The others, they felt the level of risk was so low that it didn't warrant being held up. But we should also study the incumbent TLDs and name collisions in the incumbents, because this is not just a new TLD basis. This could occur in existing TLDs, and it occur in CCTLDs and others. So if we're going to look at this from a technical standpoint and a comprehensive matter, we think that makes sense.
Thank you. If no one else wants to weigh in on that, let me ask Taylor if you would start and then go down the panel. What do you think the DNS will look like in 5 years? What will ICANN look like in 5 years? Will it even be there? Could you comment on what you think is going to happen?
Well, I hope ICANN will be there, and I think there will be more new TLDs. There will be more TLDs. I definitely think there are going to be a number of additional spaces where people can register, people can use names. There's going to be a lot of activity. What's impossible to say is how successful are they all going to be? What type of new models are we going to see? What type of evolution are we going to see that comes out of the domain space over the next 5 years? No one can argue that they're going to be a lot more, but out of all of the additional new TLDs, we don't know how many are going to be successful. From our perspective, we think that a .Nike or a .Google, where there's already brand equity, there's sophisticated people, marketers, with essentially, if you look at Google, they have the world as their audience. I would say they have a lot greater chance of being able to leverage a .Google and do something different and outside of the box and creative and go beyond how we conceive of the domain spaces today. I think that could be something completely different and new, but again, it's impossible to say. And who knows? These technology issues might be something that puts a huge, or essentially puts the brakes on a number of these new TLDs. But 5 years from now, I have no idea.
Excellent question. To think long-term. From a technology perspective, I think we'll continue to see broad use of the domain name system. It has proven itself so well over 3 decades and continues to be foundational as a directory, as a place to look up names that you can administer in a hierarchical fashion. One of the great things about the design of domain name system is that there is no central authority other than the authority that says what goes at the very top. From there on down, it is all distributed by countries, by generics, by organizations, one level to another level to another level. It's the beauty of the forethought of the design. Another new technology trend that has made DNS even more valuable in security and stability is the domain name system security extensions, or DNSSEC. And that tells you confidently that the information that the domain name system is returning to you as a relying party is what was intended by the parties who put it in the system to begin with, whoever published it in this hierarchical structure. I expect we'll see more use of DNSSEC and more information in general that needs to be distributed this way, put in the domain name system. That's why it's so important to have the assurance that DNS does no harm, and to look carefully not only at things that might affect DNS itself, but the impact that DNS has on the rest of the world.
Thanks. I think it'll be interesting to see in the next 5 years what happens in terms of innovation. I think there will be new gTLDs where innovation can occur, and it will be fascinating to see what creative things people do with the new gTLD. For example, will .art become a place for artists and musicians and photographers, and new communities could be created around some of them. At the same time, I think there'll be many failures, both from registries who realize that there's no ROI from this business. It's very expensive to run a registry, and it's difficult. So I think what's going to happen with the failures concerns me, and I'm also concerned about consumer confusion that will arise. And if at a certain point there'll be possibly domain name fatigue, where people just get so overwhelmed by all these choices that they just go to their search engine, and then the system becomes largely irrelevant, which is, to me, not a wonderful outcome. So hoping to avoid that.
Okay, so I'm going to pony off of what the other panelists have said. A couple of things. First of all, John was talking about building a shopping mall, and I think one of the things that we're going to have to take a look at is the fact that there are going to be so many new consumers at that shopping mall. People who were heretofore not in our plans at all, not on the map at all, and all of a sudden, not only is there going to be there's going to be new shopping outlets, there are going to be new shoppers. All of them have different levels of sophistication, both in terms of online, online safety and security, how they comport themselves, as well as some risks to the system that come from having so many new people. So I think that's a real challenge and a real opportunity to the system. I agree that there will be new business models. I think that's exciting. I think that's exciting as hell. We work with .Africa and .NGO amongst others, and .Africa is a fascinating business model where they're trying to pony off of the sense of identification of a region. .NGO for a whole community trying to come together. I think there are going to be a lot of things like that where you're going to see things that are not just community in the traditional sense and not just commercial in the traditional sense, but some sort of combination of the two. If the plumber community, for example, isn't a good example, there may be others that are examples which are partly commercial and partly community. And I think that's very exciting. I agree completely that, especially given the newness of all of this. I did a presentation to the Corporate Council in Africa, some of the largest companies on earth that work in Africa, some of the largest companies on earth, period. And to a person, they had no idea this was coming. These are the people in Washington who are supposed to know this. They live around the corner from all of us, and they have no idea that this is coming. So I think that there is the possibility for some real fatigue. Search is the likely outcome of that. We need to get our eyes around and our thoughts around what that will mean, and what that will mean as search becomes global as opposed to just in the global north. And then lastly, to the question about ICANN, I think ICANN is going to have to be different. I mean, we're already seeing this with what's happening with the Brazil meeting. I think that there's some real confusion about where it's going to go. I think it's of concern to the business community. It's certainly of concern to us. At the same time, the way that it was as more of a closed system and more of an insider system was bound to change. And so the question is, can we catch up, and can we move forward fast enough to make sure that ICANN stays relevant? There's almost no question that governments are going to try to get more influence. I hope that we can still maintain the same kind of multi-stakeholder look and feel that we've had in the past, because I think that's been a tremendous strength of the system at this point and has provided the fertile ground for these kinds of innovations that we're talking about.
Thanks, Andy. So, Yeah, I agree with a lot of what folks have said so far. I think we are aligned that there will be broad use of the DNS, and we're aligned to make sure that that happens and work together on that as a community. As mentioned, we have a domain name association, a new trade organization built by people all over the industry to get together to try to work together on issues that were of joint support. And something like broad use of the DNS and making sure the technology works well and making sure ICANN in 5 years is still the special entity that it is with multi-stakeholder model, bottom-up consensus building support, things like that. So we're all aligned on that, I think, going forward. And as far as the new TLD program goes, the issue is how do you define success, right? We define it as bringing more consumer choice, more meaningful names to consumers. It's not just based on numbers of registrations. I think you got to go a lot deeper than that. And I think there's a required ICANN evaluation after a year of the program to look at it. As far as failures go, Sarah, I agree that there will be some that are not economically viable. Thankfully, ICANN put something in the contracts with all of the new applicants where we had to put 3 to 5 years worth of fees essentially up front. So we all put in a letter of credit or an actual deposit account. So there are some protections. There's also a requirement to move to what's called an eBureau, or an emergency back-end registry operator, if there's a problem. So there are a lot of protections in case of failure. And if you look at the history with registrar failures to date, they've been pretty smooth transitions. So thankfully, I agree that it'll happen. Hopefully they'll be handled well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to pose one more question, and at the same time, ask anybody that's in the audience that may have a question, please, as this question is winding up, please let us know. And I'd like to go down the line again, and it's going to ask about the new TLD program and its impact on internet governance. And internet governance is perhaps a little bit off the point here, but the TLD program may fit into it in this sense. The International Telecommunications Union, in their conference last year, the World Conference of International Telecommunications, there was a concerted push to get internet governance into the hands of governments. And it didn't quite get over the top, but it came up with some fractured ITRs at the end of the process. This year, ICANN's having a meeting in Brazil that's along the same lines, or it sounds like it may be along the same lines. But the ITU itself has a plenipotentiary meeting in October, November. It's a seminal time for them. And so my question is, will this be a factor that plays into changes in internet governance coming this year, or setting the stage for changes? Keep those two together.
I don't think it works anymore.
Keep the other one
Yeah.
in the middle of the table. Thanks.
Okay. I think I don't think it doesn't work at all. I think the answer is probably absolutely, by virtue of the fact that this program has brought in so many new stakeholders that not necessarily weren't there before, but it's just brought so many people out of the woodwork, and specifically companies, governments, etc. By virtue of how many people are involved with the new TLD, the money that's involved, the time that's been invested, spent, I think there are definitely going to be new players that are taking part in the conversation, that have interest to protect, or that have interest that they want to see served, so to speak. So there will definitely be more people at the table, and I think absolutely internet governance is going to change. And I think it was mentioned by some of the other panelists that ICANN will have to change, and it's going to have to change. But in terms of would we want to see going from a multi-stakeholder model, which at its roots makes sense, and is I think the best thing overall, would we want to go to a top-down model where governments set all policy? I don't think that's a worst-case scenario, but I don't think that's a situation that many people in this room want to find themselves in. So it'll be an interesting road. It is.
On this end of the table, we think it's a worst case scenario.
Probably a worst case scenario.
I'll pick up on some of the same themes from Taylor. It's a fascinating time that we're living in, and any of us who observe the changes for 10 years, 20 years or more, our world is so connected at this point, and the potential of the internet so significant. In fact, looking at the possibilities for the global south, how much the world will be different. So it's understandable that everyone wants a seat at the table, from government, industry, individual users. And one thing I can say from internet history is that when the people have put their minds together to make things that work, this is the IETF motto of the rough consensus and the running code, right? That makes a difference. So governance is good, but getting things right is better. So I'm hopeful that these opportunities, the dialogue, the I-stars and so on that proceed, will keep that focus in mind. This is ultimately about making things better.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a pretty, you're not going to get a lot of debate on this issue. I think everyone on this panel wants ICANN to succeed. We want the rollout to go smoothly, because if it doesn't, it just draws unneeded attention. So I think that we want the multi-stakeholder process to succeed, and that's why we all participate, I think, at some level, because it has generally worked, and the consequences of expanding the discussion are, it's always good to discuss, but we have to make sure that, we're talking about a seat at the table and not, kind of, somebody else operating the table, and, I'll pass it on.
Okay, should I take this one?
Yep.
This one, okay. Obviously, I think we are in a lot of agreement. I'm going to talk about money, because everyone cares about money, and I think that that's at the root of a lot of this. There's an aspect of power, but really when it comes down to it, it's money. We do a lot of work in places like Africa and Latin America, and one of the things that we see routinely is that the government's plans for development, whether it's employment, whether it's build out of underserved regions of a country or something like that, almost all of them have something to do with internet, right? Internet's going to be the engine of our growth. It's going to allow us to skip steps in development, all of those kinds of things. So we were actually, to a certain extent, a little bit lucky that this was felt like such a backwater for so long. It developed in its infancy this as a very, very small community. Now there's a lot more money on the table. It's a lot more visible. It's not a great surprise to me that there are a lot of countries that are saying, hey, wait a second, we can't sit back and be passengers in the car. We want to drive, okay? That presents, in my mind, a real opportunity, though, because one of the big things that happens is that a lot of the governments around the world aren't particularly great to their citizens either, right? And if you sit around and wait for your government to create economic development, you know how that works in most places. What creates economic development is, and in the best of all possible worlds, some sort of coalition between different parties, one of which may be government, but certainly the private sector has a big role to play. And what I am hopeful of is that we'll be able, in this next iteration, to create a kind of coalition between the global private sector and these emerging markets. Because if we don't, what is likely to happen is we'll have emerging markets governments and not emerging markets people, consumers, users representing their countries. And that will be, the entire internet community will be poorer for it.
Nothing more to add?
Thank you. I noticed that Benny had a question, so I'm going to take the microphones down there. Along the way, let me say that when we ask for questions from the audience, we also welcome comments. Please try to keep them to a minute, but we know how gifted the audiences are at these events.
Which one is the webcast?
Webcast. Try and
Okay,
keep it
so if I wanna not webcast, and vice versa. Yeah. So this is a fascinating panel. When I first saw the message, I emailed David and I said, well, isn't there anybody from ICANN there? Because it looks like very kind of one-sided. But I see that it's more than one-sided. There are several sides to this issue. And I'm just coming from Moscow. For the audience here, I'm Vice President of ICANN for Russia, CIS, and Eastern Europe. And I have to tell you that the issues that you guys are having are completely different from the issues that they have. Like, the biggest concern last week was, when I landed there on Tuesday, was why the .moscow domain is not yet approved and the agreement is not signed. By Thursday evening, that was their biggest happy issue, because they went through the process and got it. Likewise for their other domains that they have applied. And Russia has several top-level domains that they applied for, including in Cyrillic script, but also in Latin. And I think the point that we are kind of focused here is, all the problems that we have, and the point that they're focusing there is how to make this a successful business case, or in the case of .deti, which is .kids in Cyrillic, how to make this as a successful policy case. In other words, instead of trying to limit the harmful content through software, etc., they are figuring out how to actually put all the legal content that is suitable for kids in this top-level domain. So we don't know if this will be a successful thing, because the same way you guys don't know whether any of the 300 and how many were there?
307.
Yeah, are gonna be successful. At the same time, and that's it was more of a comment, but at the same time, I was thinking if you remove you guys, Google, and a couple of others, then the number of top-level domains would suddenly drop dramatically. So it's also a business case, right? You took it and you saw that there is an opportunity, and you're risking your money in capital, whatever, and you're doing what it takes. By the way, and that's with this I'm ending it. The candidates for .Moscow, there was a lunch for ICANN accredited registrars and registries, and this lunch is only will increase obviously in the future, but they were like, you don't understand, we need the .Moscow before the end of the year because our investors are not giving any new money unless we have an agreement. So I was happy they got it because now they're getting new money, but it's part of the business, so you risk a little bit. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
No, I said it's more of a comment.
Did you have a question? Mike Nelson?
Thank you very much. A great panel. I mean, I've been to a number of sessions on the perils of the new gTLDs and the benefits, and you guys have covered the territory very well. I was very involved when I was at IBM with the IPv6 transition, and people tended to focus on the router companies and the people who were actually building the technology that made the internet work. But the success of IPv6 requires a lot of other people to get involved. And so I'd like to explore a little bit who else really has to take action before these gTLDs become useful. I've been tweeting, and as I was tweeting, I noticed another tweet about gTLDs regarding a story that posted 5 minutes ago that said, Bing now recognizes new gTLDs, parentheses, Google does not.
Google's everywhere, man.
Yeah. So my question is, besides the search engines, who else has to really change their way of business and has to start recognizing the new gTLDs before they become first-class gTLDs, equivalent to .com and .net?
Do you want to be this guy too?
Yeah, that works.
So Mike, you ask excuse me, you ask a good question about adoption and with parallels to IPv6 and the fact you need end-to-end support and all the other places. So one place I'll highlight, especially is looking at the benefits of new gTLDs for people who don't speak English or use Latin character sets. So you'd like to have domain names that are entirely internationalized, both sides of the dot. That's promising, moving into new parts of the world and so on. You'd need support through applications, browsers, email systems, and so on. Very often when you're registering an account on a website, the identifier you use for yourself is your email address. So even the entry field for the email address that you register has to recognize all the international characters left and right and so on. So that's a place where the upgrade that I think has the most global benefit would need further encouragement. The other aspect to look at this is who else needs to be concerned, who's in the ecosystem of DNS. And that starts with the application developers who make queries to the domain name system, the operating system manufacturers, other platform providers, network operators, system administrators. There are a number of places in the value chain, and it's worked so well so far that you might not even notice all the players that are in there, but I think similar to your experience with IPv6, it touches everyone.
No, just the wireless.
So Mike, that's a great question as well. One thing we're working on, I mentioned before, the Domain Name Association, it's comprised of registries, both existing gTLDs, ccTLDs, new registries, registrars, and other related parties, is we're setting up a technology committee to help look at all these issues. I think we're aligned